the true story of Kuman Thong that gave foreigners goosebumps. Chapter 1. I thought Kuman Thong was just a ghost story. Before I came to Thailand, I thought Kuman Thong was nothing more than a ghost story. The kind of story people tell around campfires. The kind of story that grows larger every time it is repeated. I had heard strange things online. Stories about tiny spirits. Stories about dolls moving by themselves. Stories about people leaving toys and sweets for invisible children. Most of it sounded impossible, and if I am being honest, a little ridiculous. As a journalist from England, I had spent years investigating unusual beliefs around the world. I had visited haunted castles in Scotland. I had interviewed people who claimed to see ghosts in abandoned hospitals. I had walked through villages where old legends still shaped daily life. Almost every place had its own mysteries. Thailand, I assumed, was no different. When my editor suggested I travel there to create a documentary about local traditions, I accepted immediately. Not because of Kuman Thong, but because Thailand fascinated me. I imagined golden temples, bustling night markets, beautiful beaches, ancient history, friendly people, the usual things foreign visitors talked about. Kuman Thong was simply a curious footnote, a strange cultural detail, nothing more. At least, that is what I believed before one particular evening changed everything. The plane landed in Bangkok just before sunset. The city stretched endlessly beneath the airplane window. Rivers of traffic glowed orange and red. Clusters of skyscrapers reflected the fading sunlight. Far below, the Chao Phraya River curved through the city like a ribbon of dark silk. As soon as I stepped outside the airport, warm air wrapped around me. Thailand felt different immediately. Not better, not worse, just different. The air carried unfamiliar scents. Grilled meat, jasmine flowers, rain-soaked concrete. Street food cooking somewhere nearby. It was early evening, but the city felt very much alive. Motorcycles buzzed through traffic. Vendors called out to customers. Families walked together along crowded sidewalks. Even after a long flight, I found myself smiling. There was an energy here that was difficult to describe, an energy that seemed to move slowly and quickly at the same time. I checked into a small hotel near the old part of the city. The room was simple, clean sheets, a wooden desk, a small balcony overlooking a narrow street. Below, food carts lined the road. Tiny clouds of steam rose into the night air. People gathered around plastic tables. Conversations drifted upward. For a while, I simply stood there listening. The city felt warm, not only in temperature, but in spirit. I slept well that night, and the next morning, I began filming. Over the next several days, I explored Bangkok. I visited temples, markets, museums, canals. I spoke with monks, street vendors, students, taxi drivers. Everyone seemed eager to share something about their city. One afternoon, while walking through a neighborhood far from the tourist areas, I noticed something unusual. Tucked between two buildings stood a small shrine. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Thailand has countless shrines. Many stand beside homes. Others stand near businesses. Some sit quietly beneath large trees. People often leave flowers, incense, or small offerings. This shrine seemed similar. Until I looked closer. It was surrounded by toys. Hundreds of toys. Tiny toy cars, plastic soldiers, stuffed animals, dolls, colorful balls, children's bicycles. There were so many toys that they spilled beyond the shrine itself. Some looked brand new. Others appeared faded by years of sun and rain. Rows of bright red soft drinks stood neatly arranged nearby. Small cups of milk, candy, cookies. I stopped walking. The sight was impossible to ignore. A middle-aged woman nearby noticed my confusion. She smiled. "You first time see Kuman Thong?" I nodded. "Kuman Thong?" She pointed toward the shrine. "Yes." I stepped closer. The small statue inside depicted a young child. Its face seemed calm, almost peaceful, not frightening at all. Nothing like the horror stories I had seen online. The woman watched me carefully. "You know Kuman Thong?" "A little," I admitted. "Ghost child?" She laughed softly. The expression on her face surprised me. There was no fear, no discomfort, only amusement. Foreigners always say ghost. Then she shook her head. Not exactly. Before I could ask more, she excused herself and continued down the street. But her words stayed with me. Not exactly. That evening, I mentioned the shrine to my taxi driver. His name was Somchai. He was probably in his late 50s. Kind eyes, gentle voice. The sort of person who immediately made strangers feel comfortable. Traffic moved slowly through the city. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Neon signs reflected on the wet streets. Bangkok seemed almost dreamlike after dark. When I mentioned Kuman Thong, Somchai glanced at me through the rearview mirror. You visited shrine? Yes. What did you think? I laughed. Honestly, I thought it was strange. He smiled. Most foreigners do. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Rain continued falling. The rhythmic sound filled the car. Finally, I asked, do people really believe Kuman Thong exists? Somchai considered the question carefully. The silence lasted long enough that I wondered whether he would answer at all. Then he spoke. In Thailand, belief is not always simple. What do you mean? Again, he thought carefully. You believe in luck? I shrugged. Sometimes. You believe when someone loves you even if you cannot see love? I smiled. That's different. Maybe. His eyes returned to the road. Some people believe Kuman Thong protects. Protects what? Family, business, home. I looked out the window. Rainwater flowed along the sidewalks. People huddled beneath umbrellas. Street vendors continued cooking despite the weather. Life moved forward as though the rain hardly existed. Do you believe in it? I asked. Somchai smiled. The answer came surprisingly quickly. I respect it. The distinction caught my attention. Not believe. Respect. There was something important hidden in that difference. Something I did not yet understand. The next day, curiosity pulled me back toward the subject. I began asking more questions. Many people had heard stories. Some claimed Kuman Thong brought good fortune. Others described strange coincidences. A few told stories that made my skin crawl. But what fascinated me most was the consistency. Regardless of age, regardless of education, regardless of profession, people spoke about Kuman Thong with surprising sincerity. Not necessarily certainty, but sincerity. Nobody seemed interested in convincing me. Nobody demanded belief. Instead, they simply shared stories. And often, those stories revealed something deeper. A connection between memory, family, tradition, and spirituality. The more I listened, the more complicated the subject became. This was not merely a ghost story. It was part of something larger. Part of how many people understood the world. One evening, I found myself sitting beside a canal. The sun had nearly disappeared. Orange light reflected across the water. Wooden houses stood quietly along the banks. Some residents watered plants. Others prepared dinner. Children rode bicycles along narrow pathways. The atmosphere felt peaceful. A gentle breeze carried the scent of cooking rice and charcoal smoke. Nearby, an elderly man sat fishing. We exchanged greetings. Eventually, conversation began. When I mentioned Kuman Thong, he nodded slowly, as though discussing an old friend. Many stories, he said. Are they true? The old man smiled. The same smile I had seen on several faces already. A smile that suggested the question itself might be incomplete. Some stories true, some stories not. Same everywhere. Then he returned his attention to the water. For a while, we sat together in silence. The sky darkened. The first stars appeared. A small boat drifted slowly through the canal. Everything felt calm. Yet somewhere beneath that calmness, my curiosity continued growing. Later that night, I returned to my hotel. Rain clouds gathered once again. Thunder rumbled far away. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. I made tea, opened my notebook, and reviewed the interviews from the day. Several hours passed. Outside, rain began falling heavily. The sound echoed softly against the building. Perfect weather for writing. Perfect weather for stories. I listened to recordings, reviewed footage, organized notes. Eventually, I reached a clip from a shop owner I had interviewed earlier. His voice filled the room. He was explaining why he kept a small Kuman Thong statue near his business. Then he said something unexpected, something that made me stop writing, something that would stay with me for the rest of the journey. He said, "Most foreigners think Kuman Thong is about fear." He paused, then continued, "But the strangest thing is not what people see. It is what they feel." The rain seemed louder suddenly. I replayed the sentence. Once, twice, 3 times. Something about it unsettled me. Not because it sounded frightening, because it sounded sincere, entirely sincere. Near midnight, unable to sleep, I stepped onto the balcony. The street below was nearly empty. Rain continued falling steadily. A few motorbikes passed. A lone food vendor packed away supplies. Across the road, a small shrine stood beneath a tree. Its candles flickered softly in the darkness. The scene felt peaceful, almost beautiful. Then I noticed something. At first, I assumed I was mistaken. A trick of light, a shadow, nothing more. But as I watched, I became strangely aware of a small object resting near the shrine. A toy, a tiny toy car. I was certain it had not been there earlier. Of course, someone could have placed it there. There was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Many reasonable explanations. Yet, for reasons I could not explain, a chill moved through me. Not fear, not exactly, just a feeling that perhaps I had arrived at the edge of a story far older than I realized. A story woven into the quiet corners of Thailand. A story carried by whispers, traditions, memories, and belief. And as rain continued falling across the sleeping city, I found myself staring into the darkness below, wondering, listening, waiting, because for the first time since arriving in Thailand, I was no longer laughing at the story of Kuman Thong, and deep down I had the unmistakable feeling that this journey was only beginning. Chapter 2. The shrine filled with toys. The next morning, Bangkok woke beneath a sky the color of silver. Rain clouds drifted lazily above the city. The air smelled fresh. Leaves glistened with drops of water from the night's storm. From my hotel balcony, I watched shop owners raise metal shutters. Street vendors prepared breakfast. Motorcycles hummed through narrow streets. The city slowly stretched awake. Yet my thoughts remained fixed on one thing: Kuman Thong, the toy car, the shrine, and the strange feeling that had followed me into sleep. I had not dreamed of ghosts. I had not seen anything supernatural, but curiosity had taken root. The kind of curiosity every journalist recognizes. The kind that whispers, "There is more to this story." So after breakfast, I began making phone calls. By noon, a local producer helping with my documentary arranged something unexpected: a visit to one of Thailand's most famous Kuman Thong shrines, located outside Bangkok, in the province of Nakhon Pathom, about an hour and a half away. Many people go there, she explained. Not only Thai people, foreigners too. Why? I asked. She smiled. Maybe after today you'll understand. The drive out of Bangkok felt peaceful. The skyscrapers gradually disappeared. Busy roads became smaller. Concrete gave way to fields. Palm trees swayed beside quiet highways. Small villages appeared between stretches of green farmland. The landscape felt slower, gentler. The frantic energy of the capital slowly faded behind us. My driver, a cheerful man named Anand, seemed eager to talk. When I mentioned Kuman Thong, he laughed softly. "You still investigating?" "Apparently. You believe now?" "Not yet." Anand nodded. "Good." I raised an eyebrow. "Good? You should not believe too quickly." That answer surprised me. Back home, people often imagine spiritual believers as eager to accept everything without question. Yet, throughout Thailand, I kept encountering something different. People did not seem interested in forcing belief. Instead, they encouraged observation, patience, experience, as though understanding arrived slowly, like sunlight at dawn. By late afternoon, we arrived. The shrine stood within a large temple complex surrounded by trees. The atmosphere felt immediately different. Not frightening, not dark, not mysterious in the way horror movies portray such places. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful. Birds sang in nearby branches. Incense drifted gently through the air. Temple bells chimed softly in the distance. People moved quietly along shaded pathways. Some carried flowers, others carried toys. Many carried both. I followed the crowd, and then I saw it. For a moment, I simply stood there, speechless. The stories had not prepared me. The photographs online had not prepared me. Nothing had prepared me. The shrine was enormous. And everywhere I looked, there were toys, thousands of them, rows upon rows, shelves filled with dolls, plastic robots, stuffed animals, toy trucks, toy airplanes, tiny bicycles, action figures, wooden horses, brightly colored balls. The collection seemed endless. Some toys appeared brand new. Others looked decades old, faded, weathered, loved. Each one represented a visitor, a story, a prayer, a memory. The sight was simultaneously beautiful and unsettling. Not because anything appeared frightening, but because of the scale, the devotion, the sheer number of offerings left by people over many years. I had never seen anything like it. Nearby, a grandmother sat quietly arranging flowers. Her face carried the calm expression of someone who had spent many years at peace with the world. I introduced myself. She smiled warmly. When I explained that I was researching Kuman Thong, she nodded. "You are from England?" "Yes." She laughed softly. "Many foreigners come. They are always surprised." I glanced around the shrine. "That's understandable." Her eyes followed mine. "People think it is scary, isn't it?" The old woman smiled. "No." The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without doubt. "No." Then she gently touched one of the dolls beside her. Kuman Thong is not about fear. The sentence echoed something I had heard before, again and again. Not fear, respect, care, protection, family. The same ideas kept returning. I sat beside her. The afternoon breeze stirred the leaves above us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Eventually, I asked, "Why do people leave toys?" She looked toward the shrine, as though searching for the right words. Then she answered, "Because children like toys. Simple, direct, yet somehow profound." The answer made perfect sense within the belief itself. If people viewed Kuman Thong as child spirits or protective beings associated with children, then toys were not strange offerings at all. They were acts of kindness, acts of hospitality, acts of care. The realization shifted something inside me. Not belief, but perspective. As the afternoon slowly turned toward evening, I continued exploring. The deeper I walked into the shrine grounds, the more fascinating details emerged. There were miniature playgrounds, tiny toy houses, colorful toy cars lined up in neat rows, small bicycles leaned against walls. Even toy animals seemed carefully positioned. Nothing felt random. Everything appeared intentional. Someone had placed every single object there, one by one, over many years. The effect was extraordinary. At times, it felt like walking through an abandoned toy store. At other times, it felt like entering a forgotten dream, a dream preserved in plastic and paint. Then something caught my attention. Near the back of the shrine sat a doll, unlike the others. This doll looked old, very old. Its clothing had faded almost white. The face showed signs of age, years of sun, years of humidity, years of exposure. Yet despite its condition, visitors continued leaving offerings beside it. Fresh flowers, candy, milk, small toys. I pointed toward it. "Why that one?" A temple volunteer standing nearby followed my gaze. His expression changed slightly, almost amused. "Ah," he nodded. "You noticed. Everyone notices. What is special about it?" The volunteer looked around carefully, then lowered his voice. "There are stories." Of course there were stories. Every shrine has stories. Every old object gathers stories. Still, something about his tone made me lean closer. "What kind of stories?" The volunteer smiled, the same mysterious smile I had seen from others. A smile halfway between certainty and mystery. Then he said, "People say the doll does not like being moved." I laughed softly. You mean people believe it is haunted? He shook his head. No, again, not haunted, not cursed, not evil. Those interpretations seem to belong mostly to outsiders. Instead, he simply said, it always comes back. I waited. Surely there was more. But the volunteer remained silent, watching my reaction. Finally, I asked, comes back from where? The man pointed toward the doll. Years ago, workers moved it. Why? Cleaning, renovation, different reasons. What happened? The volunteer shrugged. Later, people found it here again. I smiled politely. There had to be an explanation. Someone moved it back. A misunderstanding. A mistake. Human memory is unreliable. Stories grow larger over time. That was the logical answer. Yet, strangely, the volunteer seemed completely uninterested in convincing me. He merely shared the story, then returned to his work, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As sunset approached, the atmosphere transformed. Golden light filtered through the trees. Shadows stretched across the pathways. Birdsong softened. The crowds became smaller. Many visitors had already left. The remaining guests moved quietly, almost reverently. Candles began appearing throughout the shrine. Small points of warm light flickered among the toys. The effect was breathtaking, beautiful, peaceful, and somehow slightly surreal. I found a bench and sat down. The air carried the scent of incense and flowers. Nearby, a family knelt together in prayer. A little girl carefully placed a toy rabbit beside the shrine, then bowed respectfully. Watching her, I felt something shift again. Perhaps the story of Kuman Thong was never really about ghosts. Perhaps it was about relationships, memory, protection, the invisible bonds people form with things they love. As darkness settled over the temple grounds, I prepared to leave. The parking area stood several minutes away. The pathways were now illuminated by soft yellow lights. Crickets sang from hidden corners of the gardens. The evening air felt cool compared to the heat of the day. I walked slowly, taking final notes, recording impressions. Then I heard a voice behind me, an elderly groundskeeper. He had been sweeping leaves near one of the buildings. Excuse me. I turned. He approached slowly. You are making documentary? Yes, he nodded. Then pointed toward the old doll, visible even from a distance, its faded shape illuminated by candlelight. You ask about that doll? I did. The old man rested both hands on his broom. For several seconds, he remained silent. Then he spoke. When I was young, my grandfather worked here. I waited. The evening breeze rustled the trees above us. My grandfather told me something. What? The old man smiled gently. Many foreigners come looking for ghosts. The answer surprised me. He continued. But that is not what they find. What do they find? The old groundskeeper looked toward the shrine, toward the thousands of toys, toward the candles flickering in the darkness, toward decades of offerings left by people whose names had long been forgotten. Then he answered quietly. They find a part of Thailand they never understood before. The words lingered between us. Simple, yet powerful. That night, back at the hotel, I reviewed my footage. The toys, the dolls, the visitors, the candles. Everything appeared normal on camera, perfectly ordinary. Yet, somehow, the feeling of the place remained difficult to capture. I stared at one particular image, the old doll, the one nobody liked moving, the one surrounded by stories, the one visitors continued honoring year after year. For several minutes, I watched the footage. Then something unexpected happened. A local assistant working with our production team sent me a message. Just one sentence, no explanation. No context, only a single line. Tomorrow I want to introduce you to someone who heard a child laughing inside the shrine after midnight. I stared at the message. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the Bangkok sky. And for the first time since arriving in Thailand, a chill slowly ran down my spine. Chapter 3. The doll that always returned. The following morning arrived quietly. A soft gray mist floated above the rooftops of Bangkok. Rain from the previous night still clung to leaves and power lines. The city felt calm, as though it had not fully awakened yet. I sat near the hotel window with a cup of coffee, but my attention was not on the city. It was on the message I had received the night before, a child laughing inside the shrine after midnight. The sentence sounded exactly like the beginning of a ghost story, the kind of story I would normally dismiss. Yet after visiting the shrine in Nakhon Pathom, I found myself reacting differently, not because I believed it, but because I had begun to understand something important. The story of Kuman Thong was not really about proving whether something supernatural existed. It was about understanding why these stories survived, why generation after generation continued telling them, and why so many people spoke about them with such sincerity. That afternoon, I met the person my assistant wanted me to interview. Her name was Pim. She was in her early 40s, a school teacher, calm, soft-spoken, the sort of person who carefully chose every word. We met in a small cafe overlooking a canal. Rain clouds drifted lazily overhead. Wooden boats moved slowly through the water. The atmosphere felt peaceful, not the setting one would expect for a chilling story. Yet as Pim began speaking, I found myself listening very carefully. I was not looking for anything unusual, she said. That is important. I nodded. Many stories become exaggerated because people are actively searching for mysteries. Pim seemed different. She continued, a few years ago I visited the shrine with friends. Late at night, there was a special ceremony. I took notes. The cafe remained quiet around us. Only the distant sound of water interrupted the conversation. After midnight, most people had gone home. We were helping clean. She paused, then smiled slightly. As teachers, we are used to cleaning after children. The joke eased the tension, but only briefly. Then I heard laughter. I looked up. What kind of laughter? A child. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. A little boy. I waited. Pim stirred her tea. The spoon softly touched the cup. I thought someone had brought their child, so I looked. What happened? She shook her head. No one. The smile disappeared. I checked everywhere. The buildings, the parking area, the gardens. No children. The cafe suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, a boat passed slowly along the canal. Water rippled gently behind it. What did your friends think? I asked. They heard it too. I considered the story carefully. There were countless possible explanations. Sound travels strangely at night. People mishear things. Memory changes over time. All perfectly reasonable. Yet Pim was not trying to convince me. Like everyone else I had interviewed, she simply shared her experience, then left the conclusion to me. After our conversation ended, I continued researching. The deeper I dug, the more stories emerged. Most were simple, unexpected, good fortune, dreams, coincidences, moments that people interpreted in different ways. Yet one story appeared again and again. The old doll. The doll that always returned, no matter whom I asked. Temple workers, visitors, shopkeepers nearby, everyone seemed familiar with it. The details varied, but the central story remained surprisingly consistent. Years ago, workers moved the doll. Later, it somehow ended up back in its original location. The story repeated itself enough times that it became part of local folklore. Whether true or not almost seemed irrelevant. The story itself had become important. Part of the shrine's identity, part of its living history. 2 days later, I returned to Nakhon Pathom. This time, I arrived shortly before sunset. The shrine looked even more beautiful than before. Golden light filtered through the trees. Candles flickered among rows of toys. The air smelled faintly of incense and flowers. Visitors moved quietly between the offerings. The atmosphere felt peaceful, almost dreamlike. I walked directly toward the old doll. It sat exactly where I remembered, still surrounded by flowers, still receiving offerings, still quietly watching over the shrine. A temple caretaker noticed my interest. He approached with a friendly smile. I remember you, the journalist. I laughed. I've become predictable. The caretaker nodded. You are interested in the doll. Apparently I was. His name was Lek. He had worked at the temple for nearly 20 years. long enough to know every corner of the grounds, long enough to hear every story. We sat beneath a large tree overlooking the shrine. As evening slowly settled around us, he shared what he knew. People always ask about that doll. Do you know the real story? I asked. Lek smiled. The real story? He laughed softly. Which version? A fair point. Stories change, especially stories passed from one generation to another. Still, I encouraged him to continue. The doll is old, very old. Nobody knows exactly how old. Older than me. He chuckled. Then his expression grew thoughtful. People have moved it before. Several times. Why? Cleaning, repairs, reorganization, normal reasons, perfectly reasonable reasons. And, again, the familiar smile appeared. The smile I had come to recognize. The smile that often preceded a story. Later, it was back. How? Lek shrugged. No idea. Someone moved it? Probably. The answer surprised me. You think so? Of course. Then he laughed again. But nobody knows who. I appreciated his honesty. Unlike sensational stories online, real people often seem comfortable with uncertainty. As darkness approached, visitors gradually disappeared. The shrine became quieter. Crickets began singing. The last rays of sunlight faded behind distant trees. Candles provided most of the remaining light. I stayed longer than intended, partly because I wanted better footage, partly because I enjoyed the atmosphere. There was something calming about the place. The toys no longer felt strange. Not entirely. Instead, they felt like evidence. Evidence of countless human stories. Hope, gratitude, memory, love. Every toy represented someone. Someone who came here carrying a wish, a worry, a prayer, or perhaps simply curiosity. Later that evening, I wandered toward the rear of the shrine grounds. Few visitors ventured there. The pathways grew darker. Trees blocked much of the moonlight. The sounds of the temple faded into the distance. Only insects remained, their voices filling the night air. Then I noticed something unusual. A small wooden shelf, hidden beneath an old tree. Several toys rested there. Unlike the others, these looked extremely old. Their colors had faded, their plastic surfaces cracked with age. Some appeared decades old. I knelt for a closer look and discovered tiny handwritten notes beside them. Most were difficult to read. Time and weather had damaged the paper, but a few remained legible. Simple messages. Thank you. Please protect my family. Thank you for helping my son. Thank you for good health. Thank you for safe travel. I stared at the notes for a long time. The words felt deeply human. Regardless of belief, regardless of culture, people everywhere ask for similar things: health, safety, family, hope. The realization softened something inside me. Perhaps that was why these stories endured, not because of fear, but because they gave form to universal emotions. As I stood to leave, an elderly woman appeared from the darkness. At first, I almost jumped. Then I laughed at myself. She smiled, clearly amused. You are looking at the old toys. Yes, they are beautiful. She nodded. They are memories. The answer seemed perfectly Thai somehow. Simple, gentle, wise. I introduced myself. She introduced herself as Auntie Mali. Like many elderly Thais I had met, she carried a calmness that felt almost contagious. We spoke for several minutes. Then I asked the question that had been lingering in my mind. Why do you think people tell these stories? Mali looked toward the shrine, toward the candles, toward the countless toys glowing softly beneath the moonlight. Then she answered, because stories help people remember. I waited. She continued, not remember ghosts, remember kindness. The sentence struck me immediately. Not remember ghosts, remember kindness. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The night breeze rustled leaves overhead. Somewhere nearby, a temple bell rang softly. The sound echoed through the darkness. Mali smiled. When people leave toys here, they are not feeding fear. They are feeding memory. The words lingered long after she finished speaking. I realized that throughout my journey, nearly every Thai person had guided me toward the same idea. Foreigners often focused on whether Kuman Thong was real. Thai people often focused on what the belief meant. The difference was subtle, yet profound. Eventually, it was time to leave. The shrine had grown almost empty. Most candles burned low. The pathways were quiet. Only a handful of visitors remained. As I walked toward the exit, I glanced back one final time. The old doll sat exactly where it always had, surrounded by offerings, surrounded by stories, surrounded by mystery. And suddenly, I understood why people continue talking about it. Not because it moved, not because it returned, not because anyone could prove anything supernatural, but because it had become part of something larger, a symbol, a story connecting generations. A reminder that some mysteries survive not because they are solved, but because they continue inspiring wonder. Back in Bangkok that night, I reviewed my footage once again. Hours passed. Rain tapped gently against the hotel window. The city lights shimmered through the darkness. Everything seemed peaceful, normal. Then my phone vibrated. A new message from my local assistant. I opened it. Only 2 sentences appeared. Tomorrow, I want you to meet a monk. Then, he believes foreigners misunderstand Kuman Thong completely. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the distant sky. And for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly felt that the strangest part of this journey was still ahead. Chapter 4. What foreigners never understand. The next morning, Bangkok felt unusually quiet. A light rain had fallen before sunrise. The streets still glistened beneath a pale gray sky. From the window of my hotel room, I watched people begin their day. Food vendors arranged fresh ingredients. Motorbike riders navigated narrow streets. Office workers hurried toward bus stops. Life moved forward with its usual rhythm. Yet my thoughts remained fixed on the message I had received the previous night. A monk? Someone who believed the foreigners misunderstood Kuman Thong completely. After weeks of interviews, I wondered what new perspective remained to be discovered. I had already heard stories from teachers, taxi drivers, temple workers, grandmothers, business owners. Each had shared a slightly different understanding, yet all of them seemed connected by a common thread. None viewed Kuman Thong as a simple horror story. That interpretation belonged mostly to outsiders, perhaps to people like me. By late morning, I arrived at a temple on the outskirts of Bangkok. Unlike the famous tourist temples, this one felt quiet and local. Tall trees shaded the grounds. Birds moved between branches overhead. The scent of incense drifted through the warm air. A few monks swept leaves from stone pathways. Others sat beneath covered pavilions reading. The atmosphere felt calm, the kind of calm that seems to slow time itself. My assistant greeted me near the entrance. "The monk is waiting." We removed our shoes and entered a simple wooden building. Inside, sunlight filtered through open windows. The room contained little more than cushions, books, and a small altar. At the far end sat an elderly monk. His robe glowed softly in the afternoon light. His face carried deep lines carved by age and experience, yet his eyes seemed remarkably young, bright, alert, peaceful. He smiled as we approached. I bowed respectfully. He returned the gesture, then invited us to sit. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt natural, comfortable. Outside, wind stirred the leaves. A distant bird called from somewhere in the temple grounds. Finally, the monk spoke. "You are the journalist studying Kuman Thong." His English was excellent. "Yes," he nodded. "And what have you learned?" The question caught me slightly off guard. I considered my answer carefully. "I've learned that Thai people see it very differently than foreigners do." The monk smiled. "A good beginning." Then he laughed softly. But only a beginning. For the next hour, we talked. Not only about Kuman Thong, but about culture, belief, history, the way people understand the world. The monk listened carefully whenever I spoke. And when he answered, he chose his words slowly, as though each sentence deserved consideration. Eventually, I asked the question that had brought me there. "Why do you think foreigners misunderstand Kuman Thong?" The monk folded his hands, then smiled. "Because foreigners often ask the wrong question." That answer intrigued me immediately. "What is the wrong question?" The monk looked out the window toward the trees, then replied, "They ask whether it is real." I waited. And that's wrong? He nodded gently. Not wrong, just incomplete. For a few moments, I sat quietly, trying to understand. The monk continued. When people visit Thailand, they often see things through their own cultural lens. He paused. They see offerings. They see shrines. They hear stories. And immediately they ask, does this spirit exist? Is this supernatural? Can this be proven? I nodded. That was exactly what I had done. The monk smiled. But many Thai people ask a different question. What question? He answered immediately. What does this teach us? The room suddenly felt very quiet. The simplicity of the answer struck me. Not, is it real? But, what does it teach us? The monk leaned slightly forward. Whether a story is literally true is sometimes less important than why it survives. Outside, rain began falling softly against the temple roof. The sound created a gentle rhythm, almost musical. The monk continued. Many Kuman Thong stories survive because they remind people about responsibility, gratitude, respect, kindness, he smiled, and memory. That word again, memory. I had heard it repeatedly throughout my journey. The old toys were memories. The offerings were memories. The stories were memories. Perhaps memory was the hidden thread connecting everything. The monk stood and walked toward a bookshelf. From it, he retrieved an old photograph. The image showed Thailand many decades ago. Wooden houses, dirt roads, children standing beside a river. He handed it to me. What do you see? A village. He nodded. What else? I looked again. Families, neighbors, children playing together, people helping one another. Simple things. The monk smiled. For most of human history, people lived very close to life and death. The sentence surprised me. He continued. Children died young. Disease was common. Life was uncertain. The rain continued falling softly outside. Many beliefs emerged from love. He pointed toward the children in the photograph. Not fear. Love. The word lingered in the room. As the afternoon passed, our conversation shifted toward Thai culture itself. The monk explained something I had slowly begun to notice. In many Western cultures, people often separate the visible world from the invisible world, science from spirituality, logic from tradition, history from myth. Thailand seemed different, not because people rejected logic, but because many accepted that life contained layers, some visible, some unseen, some explainable, some mysterious. The monk expressed it beautifully. We do not always need certainty to show respect. I wrote the sentence down immediately. It felt important. Later, we walked together through the temple grounds. Rain had stopped. Water droplets sparkled on leaves. The air smelled fresh and clean. As we passed beneath large trees, the monk greeted people who came to pay their respects. Each interaction seemed effortless, gentle, warm. Eventually, we reached a small shrine. Unlike the large shrine in Nakhon Pathom, this one was simple. A few flowers, a few offerings, nothing extraordinary. Yet the monk stopped there, then turned toward me. Tell me honestly, what did you think about Kuman Thong before coming to Thailand? I laughed. The answer was embarrassingly obvious now. I thought it was a ghost story. The monk smiled. Exactly. Then he pointed toward the shrine. And now, I looked at the offerings. The flowers, the candles, the signs of care left by countless visitors. Then I answered honestly. I think it is about people. The monk's smile widened. Now, for the first time, it felt as though I had given the correct answer. As evening approached, golden sunlight finally broke through the clouds. The temple glowed softly beneath the warm light. Monks continued their evening routines. Birds returned to the trees. Everything felt peaceful. Before leaving, I asked one final question. Do you believe Kuman Thong exists? The monk laughed, not mockingly, simply with genuine amusement. Then he answered in a way I would never forget. I believe kindness exists. The simplicity of the response left me speechless. The monk continued. I believe gratitude exists. I believe memory exists. I believe love survives longer than we imagine." Then he smiled. "If Kuman Thong helps people remember those things." He shrugged gently. "Perhaps that is enough." That evening, I returned to Bangkok. The city lights reflected across the river. Traffic moved slowly through the darkness. Neon signs glowed in every direction. Yet, despite the noise and movement, I felt unusually calm. For weeks, I had searched for explanations, evidence, answers. Instead, Thailand had offered something different: perspective. Perhaps that was why these stories endured. Not because everyone believed the same thing, but because everyone found meaning in them. The old doll, the toys, the offerings, the laughter, the stories. Each represented something deeply human, something universal, something far older than fear. Later that night, I walked alone through a quiet neighborhood near my hotel. The air felt cool after the rain. Streetlights cast golden reflections across wet pavement. A small shrine stood beneath a tree nearby. I stopped, not because I expected anything unusual, not because I suddenly believed every story I had heard, but because I felt something I had not felt when I first arrived: respect. The same word Somchai had used during that rainy taxi ride weeks earlier. Respect. At last, I understood what he meant. As I stood there, a gentle breeze moved through the leaves above me. The shrine remained silent, peaceful, still, and yet I felt connected to every story I had heard throughout this journey. The teacher, the caretaker, the grandmother, the monk, each had revealed a different piece of the puzzle. And together, those pieces formed a picture far more interesting than any ghost story. A picture of Thailand itself, its values, its kindness, its relationship with memory, its ability to find meaning in places outsiders rarely understand. When I finally returned to my hotel, I discovered a small package waiting at reception. The receptionist handed it to me. There is no name, only your room number. Curious, I carried it upstairs. The package was tiny, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside, I found only one object: a small toy car, red, old-fashioned, simple. And attached to it was a handwritten note. Just one sentence: "Before you leave Thailand, there is one more place you need to visit." I stared at the note for a long time. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the distant sky. And somewhere deep inside, I knew my journey with Kuman Thong was not quite finished yet. Chapter 5. The night I left a toy behind. The small red toy car sat on the desk beside my bed. For a long time, I simply stared at it. Outside my hotel window, Bangkok shimmered beneath a curtain of evening rain. Cars moved through the streets below. Their headlights reflected across the wet pavement like rivers of gold. Somewhere in the distance, a train crossed the city. Its sound faded into the night. The toy car remained motionless beneath the warm light of the lamp. Simple, ordinary, and yet somehow impossible to ignore. I picked it up. The paint had faded with age. Tiny scratches covered its surface. It was clearly old, perhaps very old, the kind of toy that had belonged to a child decades earlier. Attached to it remained the note. A single sentence: "Before you leave Thailand, there is one more place you need to visit." No name, no explanation, no address, only mystery. For a journalist, few things are more dangerous than curiosity. And few things are more irresistible. The next morning, I contacted my assistant. To my surprise, she immediately knew where the package had come from, or at least where it was meant to lead. "There is a shrine," she explained. "Very old, not famous, not many tourists." "Where?" She smiled. "A small village in Suphan Buri, the province lay northwest of Bangkok, far from the crowded tourist routes, far from the famous temples and beaches that filled travel brochures. The kind of place visitors rarely see, the kind of place I increasingly preferred." By midday, we were on the road. The journey felt peaceful. Rice fields stretched toward the horizon. Water buffalo stood quietly in flooded paddies. Palm trees swayed gently beneath the afternoon sun. Occasionally, small villages appeared beside the road. Wooden houses, tiny markets, children riding bicycles, Life moved slowly here, comfortably. The further we traveled, the more distant Bangkok felt, as though we were moving backward through time. Eventually, we arrived. The village was small. Perhaps only a few hundred people lived there. The roads were narrow, the houses modest. Everything felt calm, unhurried. The kind of place where people still knew their neighbors. At the edge of the village stood an enormous banyan tree. Its roots spread across the ground like ancient rivers. Its branches formed a canopy large enough to shade dozens of people. Beneath it stood a shrine, not large, not grand, simply beautiful, wooden, weathered, surrounded by flowers. And toys, many toys, not thousands like the shrine in Nakhon Pathom, but enough to immediately capture my attention. Toy cars, dolls, stuffed animals, small bicycles, bright red bottles of soft drink, offerings left carefully beneath the tree. The scene felt familiar now, comforting even. An elderly man sat nearby, watching over the shrine. His face carried the deep lines of someone who had spent a lifetime beneath the Thai sun. When we approached, he smiled warmly. My assistant introduced us. The old man nodded, then looked directly at me. You came because of the toy, not a question, a statement. I glanced at the red toy car in my hand. Yes, the old man smiled. Good. Then he gestured toward a wooden bench. Sit. So I did. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the banyan leaves overhead. Their rustling created a soothing sound, almost like distant waves. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then the old man began telling a story. Many years ago, he explained, the village had suffered a terrible flood. The river rose higher than anyone expected. Fields disappeared beneath water. Roads vanished. Families became trapped. The entire village faced uncertainty. Among those affected was a young boy, only 7 years old. The boy loved toy cars, collected them, played with them every day. According to village stories, he often brought his favorite toy to the banyan tree. Then, one year, during the flood, tragedy struck. The boy died. The details no longer mattered. Only the memory remained. The village mourned deeply, especially his family. Weeks later, someone left a toy car beneath the tree. Then another. Then another. Over time, the tradition grew. Not because people feared the boy. Not because they believed he haunted the village. But because they remembered him. And through remembering him, they remembered something larger. Compassion, community, love. The old man finished speaking. The breeze continued moving through the leaves. Somewhere nearby, birds sang. For a long time, none of us spoke. Finally, I looked around. The shrine suddenly appeared different. Not mysterious. Not frightening. Not supernatural. Human. Deeply human. Every toy represented memory. Every offering represented affection. Every story represented someone's attempt to preserve kindness against the passing of time. And suddenly, the entire journey made sense. When I first arrived in Thailand, I had assumed Kuman Thong was about ghosts. That assumption now seemed almost childish. Not because supernatural stories did not exist, they certainly did, but because those stories were only the surface. Beneath them lay something far more interesting. The stories survived because they carried meaning. They connected generations. They preserved memory. They gave form to gratitude. The monk had been right. Foreigners often asked whether Kuman Thong was real. Thai people often asked what it taught. The difference changed everything. As sunset approached, golden light filtered through the banyan tree. The shrine glowed softly beneath its branches. Villagers arrived carrying flowers. Children played nearby. Life continued as it always had. Simple, peaceful, beautiful. The old man noticed the toy car still in my hand. You should leave it. I looked down at the small red car. The paint worn by time. The edges softened by years of use. For a moment, I hesitated. Not because I suddenly believed every story. Not because I feared offending invisible spirits. But because the gesture felt meaningful, respectful. Slowly, I walked toward the shrine. The evening air felt cool. Leaves rustled gently overhead. The golden light of sunset painted everything in warm colors. Carefully, I placed the toy car among the others, then stepped back. Nothing happened. No mysterious sound, no strange movement, no supernatural sign, only silence, peaceful silence. And somehow, that felt perfect. As darkness slowly descended upon the village, candles were lit around the shrine. Their small flames flickered beneath the ancient tree. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. Families gathered for dinner. The smell of cooking drifted through the evening air. The village settled into night, and I found myself sitting quietly on the bench once more, watching, listening, thinking about everything I had learned. Before coming to Thailand, I believed the country was a place of beaches, temples, and street food. All of those things existed, of course, but they were not the whole story. The real Thailand existed in moments like this, in quiet villages, in conversations beneath old trees, in traditions passed from grandparents to grandchildren, in beliefs that outsiders often misunderstood. The deeper I traveled into Thailand, the more I realized how little I had known before arriving. Eventually, it was time to leave. The sky had grown dark. Stars appeared between the branches overhead. The shrine glowed softly in the candlelight. I stood, thanked the old man, then began walking toward the car. Halfway there, I stopped, turned around, and looked back one final time. The toys remained beneath the banyan tree, silent, still, waiting, yet they no longer seemed eerie. They no longer seemed strange. Instead, they felt like symbols, small reminders of something universal. The desire to remember, the desire to care, the desire to keep love alive long after people are gone. As we drove away from the village, darkness covered the countryside. Fields passed quietly beyond the windows. Occasional lights glowed from distant homes. The world seemed calm, almost dreamlike. My assistant eventually broke the silence. "So," she smiled, "do you believe now?" I looked out at the passing darkness, then smiled. The answer came surprisingly easily. "I think I understand," she laughed softly. "That is not the same thing." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." And somehow, that felt like the most honest answer possible. Late that night, back in Bangkok, I packed my bags. My flight home would leave the following morning. The documentary was finished. My notebooks were full. My camera contained hours of footage. Yet the most important thing I would take home could not be recorded. It was a lesson, a perspective, a new way of seeing. Outside, the city slowly drifted towards sleep. Rain began falling once again. Soft, gentle, steady. I opened the balcony door and listened. Somewhere beyond the lights and buildings and crowded streets stood countless shrines. Countless stories. Countless memories preserved through simple acts of kindness. And for the first time, I understood why those stories mattered. Not because they proved the existence of spirits, but because they revealed the heart of a culture. A culture that understood something many of us forget. That memory deserves care. That gratitude deserves expression. And that love, even after many years, still leaves traces behind. As midnight approached, I closed my notebook for the final time. The rain continued falling across the sleeping city. The lights shimmered below. And somewhere in a quiet village beneath an ancient banyan tree, a small red toy car rested among hundreds of others. No longer mine, now part of a story, part of a memory, part of Thailand. And as I finally prepared for sleep, one final thought crossed my mind. Perhaps the most chilling thing about Kuman Thong was never the possibility of ghosts. Perhaps it was realizing how easily we forget the people who came before us, and how beautifully Thailand refuses to forget. The end. Thailand still holds countless stories waiting to be discovered. If you would like to continue this journey together, I hope to see you again in the next story from Thailand through eyes. And if there is somewhere in Thailand you wish to visit through story, leave your suggestion below. Perhaps our next journey will begin there.